All right, guys, here we are.
Here we are.
Yeah, so if you're watching this, I sort of think we're doing the YouTube thing now.
Yeah,
Today,
apparently, I guess.
yeah, just a little preamble. Normally, we have our introduction at the beginning of these episodes, but because we're trying this new video thing out, you might not hear it on YouTube, but in our main podcast, you'll be able to hear it just fine. So, without further ado, I suppose my name is Ian Savage. And this is my lovely co-host, Josh Simpson. So, today,
I figured you were gonna do your little bit. I figured you're
no,
like, I'm the person that makes people miserable.
well,
That's
I understand. Yeah, I understand that's usually my thing, but I think with NBS News, I think usually I don't even think about talking about like that. Like, hey, this is the podcast that we do. It's almost like just get into it. But
that's fair. I mean, that's true. I mean, but now I got to look at you. So, like, since we changed the structure and I just don't have to hear you anymore, I got to see you again.
Yeah,
like,
I know.
I wanted the miserable part.
Yeah, I will make everybody miserable by just going ahead and saying, welcome to NBS News. Today is the 5th of September, 2020. Still feels like March somehow. And Josh, I was talking to you before we started recording, and there's a lot of interesting things on the docket. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I know you got some interesting things going on about what's going on lately with COVID and the lockdown and some other weird, strange things going on with Nancy Pelosi. So what the hell is going on?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and I didn't know if I wanted to start with this because I think it's kind of bizarre and funny, just the things that we choose to focus on, or like what my phone or whatever like tells me,
Sure.
And what kind of reverberates back and back. So I kept saying this thing about people being upset about like Nancy Pelosi going to a hair salon or something like that, and I was like, "What is this, Hairgate?" So I decided to look into this a little bit. Because there's been new developments. And so the thing that kind of is interesting to me now, this article here is obviously from the Daily Mail, which is kind of a UK,
yeah, it's a UK journal, online magazine.
It's like, online magazine. There we go. That's where I'm looking for, online magazine. So basically, there's a man named Jonathan DiNardo, which is a cosmetologist out of San Francisco, who happened to be the person who did Nancy Pelosi's hair appointment. So to kind of give the breakdown here, apparently there was a picture that was leaked. And it showed Nancy Pelosi like in the salon, and she had she had no mask on, like, and her hair had just been done. It didn't look like anybody else was around when the snapshot looks like a snapshot of a security camera. Mm-hmm. And, on Wednesday, or people were outraged by that because, to follow suit, for those of you that don't know, in California, the whole entire hype of this is that her appointment was August 31st, which was one day before beauty salons were scheduled to open on September 1st. And as of Wednesday, Pelosi gave a press conference or a statement essentially saying that she was set up by the salon owner, Mrs. Kios, or Erica Kios, or however you pronounce her last name. I guess we'll call her Erica. And so Erica went on Fox News and was saying that like she's getting death threats, because of what Pelosi said about the setup. And then I have a lot of my friends who tend to be more kind of right-leaning thinkers. Basically, my friends that read the Daily Wire, they're all like in an uproar. They're super upset by what Pelosi is doing. And for me, I just go, there's a few things. First of all, I'm going to acknowledge that I understand that there is an indoor mask mandate in California, and so I can see where it can seem kind of disingenuous for what she did. But the amount of attention this is getting and how vast it is, it's curious to me. And the one thing, Ian, I kind of wanted your opinion on that I find this to be the most interesting facet of this. Obviously, I'm generalizing here a little bit based on what I've seen anecdotally, but I feel like a lot of the people that have had more problems with this tend to be people that support Donald Trump. And the idea that they would have a hard time wrapping their head around a potential setup, basically counter argument for what had happened, just seems like, I don't know, I guess the way that, he is judged and the way that his base judges him versus the way that his base judges everybody else. I know that there's an element of he's supposed to be like, he's not a politician, so he's not labeled that way or judged the same way. But I don't know. I'm curious, Ian, because I know that you've not heard of this, but like, what are your first initial thoughts about all this?
Yeah, I mean,
before we kind of get into the next development.
Right. Yeah, I suppose that, Like the going in on August 31st is not a big surprise for me. Politicians get special privileges all the time. And so like, of course she gets to go in a day before that the salons are open, especially because, I mean, she's a big public figure. You know, if she just like, hey, my appointment is 3 in between, you know, Tiffany Haddish and John Stamos, for example, because it's in San Francisco, no guarantee it. Those two people live there. You know, like it would be, you know, it'd be like this huge thing. Like, okay, Nancy Pelosi is in a local barbershop or salon or whatever. So it makes sense that she would go in there early. The second thing here,
you're talking about like you're talking about discrepancy, like
yes,
with
yeah.
You know, with high profile people,
exactly.
you know, you obviously don't. Okay.
So there's that element to it, which is, I mean, it doesn't, I don't want to say it bothers me. It doesn't, but it's just like, of course, politicians get special privileges. The second thing here is like with the mask mandate indoors, you know, there are, the reason why, you know, places like California and Oregon, especially where we live, have these indoor mask mandates is because it is largely due to people not being able to socially distance, right? I think that's at least the mental state that these governors are thinking in, right? Like, because people can't socially distance, like you have to wear a mask. In the case of Nancy Pelosi, now I just looked up the picture, and I mean, she was like, I don't think there was really anybody else around. So she just got her hair did. Maybe somebody had left the room and she was moving on something else. The camera angle especially looks like it's one of those, not a nanny cam, but, you know, security footage, you know, of indoor, making sure, you know, theft prevention sort of thing. So I can imagine, because whatever she was doing in the previous state, you know, this is not me being apologetic for Nancy Pelosi, but just assessing the situation. And then her moving on to another thing, I'm sure she probably had a mask ready. And if she didn't, you know, then that was something between her security detail and the owners of the salon and their, you know, whatever lax policy they decided to take on the mask mandate. It is technically up to individual businesses whether or not they want to enforce them, even though if they don't, it is technically breaking the law. And then the third and final thing here, the reason why I think it's actually quite ridiculous why Republicans, first of all, I mean, the fact that this is a story, like, not that you're bringing this to me, but the fact that like this is making the news is fucking stupid. And like the reason why,
tell me how you really feel.
Yeah,
why don't you just tell us all how you really
feel? No, but you know, the fact that like, you know, conservatives or Republicans are in an uproar over this, it's like, of course they are. You know, it just goes to show you where the Republican Party is right now, and how conservatives, their general attitude towards Democrats and liberals are right now, especially in the light, the shining light of their God and Savior, Donald Trump, and the way that he acts is, you know, in such petty ways, right? Like, you know, like if, you know, what was it? This is a few days ago where he's calling World War II, like, victims, you know, of the World War II, you know, soldiers who died, called them losers. You know, it's like, what? Like, why are you
to be fair, I don't know anything about that. I thought about looking that up for this episode, but I was like, I just, you know, because I know there's a lot of stuff about that too, but I do not know enough to have an opinion on that.
Yeah.
But like, I see what you're saying. I guess
it's just pettiness.
To finish here,
I'm seeing pettiness.
Right. Yeah. DiNardo, here's her stylist, essentially had his lawyer made a statement. This is kind of like the new kind of take on this, essentially saying that, you know, knowing his boss's kind of political leanings, he does feel that a setup might have been possible to fuel the salon owner's own vain aspirations, as it was said in the statement. But, you know, I think the thing is that it also in the statement was trying to say that this salon owner had been breaking the indoor salon rule since April, where she's been letting certain clients, like, you know, delegating. I guess there's evidence of that. And apparently Pelosi and even the stylist had said that, you know, there was emails exchanged on whether or not this would be okay for her to do. And the stylist said that he got the approval from of his boss to basically take that appointment. So you are in the right state of mind here, where I was like, I feel like it's a bunch of hodgepodge, but the reason why I thought it was important to bring up is what you had just said, is this idea of several times on the podcast. You know, for me, my biggest thing too is being a progressive. You know, sometimes I have a lot of like,
so you're outing yourself.
Empathy and left-leaning ideas. Oh my, no, what I am saying is that, you know, the last time that I tried to discuss ideas, you know, what it means to be a progressive or the progressive movement, it's a lot of, like, I was called a moron. A lot of people look at the most extreme versions of either the left or the right, and we throw away or we judge in the entire movement, off of what's going on. So for me, this is the epitome of, it's interesting to me that, like, and again, this is going to be overgeneralizing just a touch, but a lot of Republicans or conservative thinkers are and you have mimicked this sentiment of, I am tired because I get demonized for what I believe in.
Yeah.
I feel like, they look at me, all these extreme leftists, they're shitting on us. They're making me feel less as human. And I'm pissed off about that. And I just think, and this is what happened. This is how Donald Trump happened, all this stuff. But then you see something like this, where it's like, if you feel that shitting, like, people that are shitting on you, and you're pissed that you're not getting the respect that you need, yet you continually shit on the other side. And if we both just use the most extreme examples of either side and shit on each other, like, there's no way that you're going to have any sort of political discourse. And this is like a further example of the disintegration of what a discourse would look like.
For sure. I completely agree with that. And I mean, it just, I see this as, it's funny, like, the sort of thin skinnedness, that's going on, at least on the right, especially people like Donald Trump, and then people who are, in uproar, this sort of thing. It's just, like I said before, it's a pettiness, but it's also like, do you not see, and I'm not like explicitly calling these people hypocrites, but it is like,
Sure.
you act so hurt all the time. This is why the term snowflake really lost its meaning, like, early on, when that sort of phrase started getting tossed around, as an insult.
Because that was an insult, originally, for the left.
Right.
That was definitely,
but it's definitely
SJW.
Yeah, right. But it can definitely be applicable to people on the right, because, like, they throw these insults left and right at the left specifically, whether it's being libtards or snowflakes, or, they criticize Black Lives Matter, when, I mean, like, I got into this huge Facebook thing the other day when a friend of mine was asking, just a general post, like, hey, is Black Lives Matter, like, are they explicitly Marxist? Have they mentioned this? And, like, all of his, and granted, like, my friend is probably more conservative than I am, and all of his friends are very conservative, and they're all typing in, like, oh yeah, they're all super Marxist, they're all communist, bastards, and all this kind of shit. All Black Lives, matter is that. And of course, I see this and I'm like, okay.
It's absurd. I mean,
and so I type in,
it's unbelievable.
They, they have Marxist leanings, but they've got, like, a little bit of this philosophy in here, and then there's this philosophy that sort of, and their movement has this sort of flair to it. And I'm like, this is sort of what I think. Black Lives Matter isn't explicitly Marxist, but that, I'm just giving my general analysis. And then somebody responds with, like, oh, well, that would sound really interesting if you knew any fucking thing that you were talking about. It's like, okay.
That's wild to me. And
like,
it's
okay.
like, it's wild to me. That's such a simple, like, Black Lives Matter should not be a difficult concept to understand. It's just like, all lives don't matter. And we want all lives to matter. So Black lives should matter in order to have all lives matter. It's not even a complicated thing to understand. And this is the best part. And this is going to be super facetious of me, and I apologize for doing so. But, like, there's a lot of people that I, either knew from the past or, like, I've seen do stuff. It's like, first of all, you didn't care in school. And it's like, you have, like, a 2.4 GPA and you didn't give a shit in high school. And then now you're coming out, you're like, I'm an economist. I'm a medical expert. I know everything that's going on, because I read articles, and it's just like, and the fact is, like, do your research. And it's like, I don't even know. It's bizarre.
Right, yeah.
The
level
of,
that's actually one of my favorite phrases, actually, when people say, do your research. I'm like, there's nothing more ironic, hearing that or seeing that from somebody who clearly hasn't done it. I mean, just today, actually, I was driving my wife to work, and I see this truck, driving around this fucking roundabout, because we got plenty of those where I live. And, he's got this, God, he had something on, he had a Trump sticker, but then he had a BLM, sticker for Black Lives Matter with, like, a circle and a cross through it. And I'm like, I'm just thinking for a moment, I'm like, okay, what is his intention on putting this little sticker on his truck? Is he saying, like, that he doesn't like the movement, or just like, no, just Black lives just don't matter? And I'm like, God, like, where, I don't know, where are we going? Where are we going with these tactics of just shitting on each other and trolling? And yeah.
Yeah, we don't. It's again like, and I feel like we're going to cover this in one of our main episodes or something. But I really do want to talk about like context and the fact that context is basically going to die online, and that whole interpretation of certain things that in one context can be negative and another context might be positive. This idea of the things that we judge based on what we
For
understand,
sure.
but. I kind of want to move on to the next little thing. This is going to be real quick because I know that we've all been dealing with the pandemic and everything happening,
Oh,
and
right. There's
a
still a
lot of us,
pandemic going on. Yeah.
yeah, we have this, yeah. You could some people you wouldn't even tell, but with all the controversy there. So this is an article from the Motley Fool. Any sort of science article, you want to make sure you look up the writer. So this is written by it was Dr. Brian O'Reilly. He's a senior biotech specialist. He's been writing for the Motley Fool since 2007. So essentially, in this article, they're talking about Moderna, which is, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I mean, that's how it reads to me.
I think so, Moderna.
But it's entering phase 3 in clinical trial testings for the coronavirus vaccine. And so the positive thing is last week there was recorded of 21,411 patients that enrolled, with the target group being 30,000 participants, which is a big increase because a week before that, it was 58% towards the total of 30,000. And now that has jumped up to 71%. And the interesting thing is that Moderna is not the only COVID vaccine trial that's running. There's Pfizer, I believe, and BioNTech all have launched phase 3 trials kind of around the similar time. And the importance of this is because the increase in participants, not only is it important for safety, but it's also important because the vaccine cannot be measured. The effectiveness of the vaccine cannot be measured until 3 to 4 weeks after the initial booster shot. And then when they get their second one, as they test it up against 2 placebo shots. So it just to me, for those of you that are not stuck in the idiotic whirlwind of the anti-vaxxer movement, and again, that's super facetious, but this idea of like having something that's more staple, that we're already in stage 3 trials. We're going to see how this works. I think that, I know that it's been slow going, but we're moving, towards essentially a maybe a vaccine for this, and maybe kind of moving forward, kind of like they did with H1N1. That's why people compare that, but people forget, as we've said in prior podcasts, a vaccine was done in 6 months. By 9 months, we had like 1 million people taking it, and then we got through it. And still today, it's part of the flu shot.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, my son in his flu shots, I mean, he had H1N1, he had influenza, I think he had polio and not smallpox, but chickenpox, maybe. I don't know. Those are sort of the same infection. But yeah, I mean, this is definitely good news. I mean, it makes sense that we are starting to see this sort of thing ramp up. It is, like what you were just saying with H1N1, we did have a vaccine within around 6 months of the initial outbreak. And I think the only reason why we are so slow going with COVID-19 is, one, it is, like we've said many times before in the podcast, it is a novel virus. So it's a new strain of similar coronaviruses, similar to SARS, and the SARS outbreak in China back in 04 or 05, right? And but on top of that, on top of it being novel, it's the fact that we live in this new age of anti-vaxxers, and we also live in this time where, for some reason, people think that the virus isn't real. I still don't know how that works in people's minds, especially when, the most of the time, this is granted, I don't have all the data in front of me, but most of the time, the people being, where we see high infection rates are in the cities, and so it happens to be that in the cities you have people who are more liberal, and it's people out in rural areas who are being less affected. Not so much anymore. It's definitely, the virus has definitely reached out into some more rural areas. Not as bad, obviously, but in those rural areas, people are going to be more conservative, not all the time, but definitely on a higher average. And then on top of that, those people might be listening to, the Trump news network and that whole pipeline.
Well, I mean, there's certain things too, and I don't mean to jump in here a little bit,
yeah.
because, and I wasn't even going to bring this up, but the only thing that I found fascinating is that there's a few people on my social media, again, that are basically anti-coronavirus. They essentially are saying that the CDC quietly changed the death rate in the United States from 153,000 to 10,000. And I spent about an hour on the CDC website and did not see that quiet change. And so I'm not sure any listeners, if you've seen this, and again, this is just hearsay. This is just what I've seen people post, this meme that's been going around. If you can find me actual data, on this quiet change of death, the CDC death toll from and I think even when I looked up, it was up to 163,000. So, but the Post claimed that they quietly changed the coronavirus death rate from 153,000 to 10,000. That's necessarybspod@gmail.com. Go ahead.
Good there. And I mean,
no,
and
I want to find it. Right. I spent an hour.
And I mean, an easy check, right, would just be to look at the CDC website, look at their death rates and the death rate, and then go to another official website that is tracking the death rates and see if they add up. I'm sure there'll be some discrepancies, maybe, plus or minus 1,000, but I mean, they should line up, right? It's pretty easy to check, I can imagine.
Right.
Yeah.
But you got a few things, Ian, but I know we've been chatting here for about 20 minutes. So I'm going to keep things rolling. So you have a few things that you're bringing to the table, which I know that, you said you were curious on my opinion with, so I'm curious for you to describe.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to say that some of the items that I pulled were more political, because it feels like everything that we talk about happens to be political.
I mean, hey, we're in an election year, though. You can't blame us there.
True.
We're in an election year, and it's
it's felt like we're in an election year since 2016. So the first thing that I have here is this was on this is coming from Business Insider. This was on the 27th of August. So that was sometime last week. So protesters set up a guillotine outside of Jeff Bezos' mansion. Now, apparently it was a prop guillotine, but people. More than 100 demonstrators gathered outside of Bezos's. That's a hard name to say with a plural. Washington D.C. mansion on that Thursday, and constructed a guillotine outside his front door to protest Amazon workers' wages. The protest came the day after Bezos's net worth surpassed 200 billion, so making him the richest person in history, which is, I mean, it's pretty incredible, and this was according to Forbes, and his wealth has now grown by about $85 billion since January, which is, of course, boosted by Amazon's soaring revenue amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
I mean, incredible is probably not the operative word that I would use, but it's definitely something.
I think, technically, right? I mean, people misuse the word awesome all the time, right? Because it just changes on our colloquium. So basically, this, there was one protester, Angela Mathlin, who was an Amazon warehouse worker who traveled from DC to Jacksonville, Florida for Thursday's protest. And she told Business Insider that she wanted to protest Amazon's enforcement of mandatory overtime during the pandemic. And Mathlin, who is currently on medical leave, said she felt unsafe showing up to work amid the COVID-19 cases, spiking cases in Florida. So she did say that the guillotine, as I mentioned at the top of this item, that it was a prop guillotine. And I guess, the reason why this hit me, why I saw this last week, and I'm just like, oh, Jesus Christ. And this has nothing to do with Black Lives Matter or police brutality. So it was honestly, it was a bit refreshing to see something a little bit more normal happen. But the fact that, it is, granted, it's not a real guillotine. People aren't going to drag Jeff Bezos out of his house, right? I'm sure he's got $1 billion.
Okay, well, hold on. I'm going to have to give you shit for the stupid sentence that you just said. What do you mean, the more normal? What? First of all, what the hell is normal? Second of all, a guillotine, a prop guillotine in front of the person who just said is the richest person in the world ever, or the richest, has the most amount of wealth ever accumulated in the time span of human history. And you're going to sit here and, first of all, and shit on other things like police brutality, but just back to normal.
Well, I'm
like, Ian, are you trying to? Ian's like, you know what? I wish it was back in the 1950s.
Yeah, that's what I really wish. Yeah, no, not the 1950s, the 1890s, but yes, I say that because I'm like, okay, this feels like, things that people used to get more upset about. Now, I'm not just saying that this is any less valid than the things that people are upset about now, or the things that people are upset about now are any less valid than this. But the fact that people are protesting their bosses' wages for being incredibly rich. To me, that makes sense. Like we've had, labor strikes in the past, like that's nothing new. And people having walkouts of Amazon warehouses prior to the coronavirus, prior to the 2016 election. So this sort of thing makes a little bit more sense. It's a little bit more familiar to me. That's why I say that. But the big thing here, the two things here, actually, the other thing I'll add here too, is that an Amazon worker, Christian Smalls, who's been an outspoken Amazon critic, is calling on the company to raise its minimum wage from $15 an hour to $30 an hour. And that struck me as like, of course, this person would ask for that. I've worked in warehouses before. No warehouse worker is worth $30 an hour. I'm sorry. Unless you're working at some amazing government facility, or you have some type of government contract, and you're, because the thing is with Amazon warehouse, most of what they're doing in these warehouses are completely automated, right? So you actually have, there's a lot of staff to operate things going on, but the staff on hand actually do very little. And so $30 an hour, even $15 an hour is pushing it. But I guess, the cost of living is high enough that, you need that sort of pay. And I see you cringing right now. So just hold on to that for a moment. But the big thing here is, and I want your opinion on the $30 an hour thing. But the big thing here that I'm worried about is the fact like they bring out a prop guillotine. Like, why? Let me ask you this, and then I'll let you speak here. Why would you even want to symbolize the killing of a rich person just because they are rich? I get it that like there's probably unsafe working conditions. I worked for Amazon before, like it wasn't great. And like there's a pandemic going on, and obviously they're trying to increase their revenue because they can in a time like this. So my two questions to you are, what do you think, about my comment, my initial comment about the $30 an hour? And then second, like, do you think this sort of gesture is the right thing to do? I get protesting and having a walkout, of your place of work. But what, I don't know. Why the guillotine? Why that symbolism? So I'll throw it over to you.
Okay. Well, first of all, as a theater kid myself, I'm gonna have to say that like I just love the dramatics of this. But no. So you said a lot of things here that I find interesting, and of course I'm gonna try to do my best to, because I could probably say a lot about what's happening here. Shit, we've done 2 episodes on the morality of billionaires alone.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
So to unpack what's happening here. But for me, though, I'm glad you at least mentioned cost of living, because look, I don't know $30 an hour because I think it fluctuates from where you are. I think, though, the point is that this is how I describe it. And, I could talk about, wage stagnation when it comes to the productivity and the value of the product versus the worker who's producing the product, and the differences in those gaps, and certain other things. But I think really what it boils down to for me is it's this idea of a slice of a pie and what people are valued or what people are worth. And so what happens is, in a capitalistic system, in my opinion, as we have scaled through time, and we have people that have capital, and we have the worker, and we have business that starts, and we're building, we have now basically assigned our self-worth to a dollar amount. And the amount that we're paid is equivalent to what we feel that we are worth as people psychologically and individually. And those two things are not the same. They're similar, but they're not the same. And so I get it. Like when you start a company, or when you do these things, when you're CEO and you have all these things going on, you feel that I am being paid what I'm worth. Now, if you know this, the wage gap between the CEO and the list employee, and I've tried to get you these numbers, and this is kind of more anecdotal, but it's increased significantly to where, like, the last report I looked at, it was like 243% times more that a CEO would make for it. And I think like back in, like, especially like when we're rebuilding it back in the day, we have a few hundred years ago, and I'm talking about maybe like the 1930s or 40s or something. It was only like 50%. You know what I mean? The number was significantly smaller than the 243%. So for me, I look at it as a pie, and I go, you're right. The cost of living has increased. accounting for inflation, it's twice as expensive to get a car. College is egregious. We put debt on the backs of people who are trying to better their lives. The cost of living. I mean, you can't. I think I saw this article the other day where it said like minimum wage cannot afford, like one person cannot afford an apartment in almost all 50 states. So when you have all these different things that are not kind of matching together, it's the value of what a CEO is worth to what their worker is worth needs to be adjusted. And I can see where on the other side, that feels like don't take my money, right? If I revalue it, then we have to shift the dollar amount where maybe a CEO, instead of being worth 243 times their base worker, they might only be worth 200 times more. And that 43 can be redistributed because you can put a higher value on what your worker does, especially when the cost of living is so high that you need to kind of match that in order to make like life sustainable and the collective economy that we run. And so I think that when you have that separation, they go, well, if you only want me to be 200 times instead of 243 times, well, then you are affecting my livelihood and what I have earned, because we have connected that value to what we have done and our own sense of worth, when it's not that. That slice of the pie is the value is shared and it's separated. And so I think that the guillotine is more of a representation of what people are, or at least a lot of people are waking up to the fact that like the conditions in which we live under, whether that be having 4 people have more money than 99% of the other people, or whether that be the fact that we spend more on our military than anybody else combined. There's certain people that look at that and go, I've been talking about this, you take 30% of my taxes, like I kind of want to see a benefit from that. You already take money from my taxes, so I hope to have a social benefit for being an American, like every other developed country does, mainly except for us. So like on my view and my way of viewing things, I completely can understand the frustrations of that. And I don't necessarily think the guillotine is direct representative. We're going to kill all the rich people. It's more of like we're waking up and we want to try to find maybe a better system for all of us to benefit the more. Like you said, it's the biological privilege we want to try to correct, and make as better the best chance possible for everybody, which is a goal in classic liberalism.
Sure. Yeah. So I think with that, we'll move on to our next item. There's a lot of interesting.
Really?
Oh, no.
You're going to let me rant?
Well,
all that?
I thought
you're not going to even say one word. You're not going to call me a socialist. You're not even going to do anything.
Well, okay. Let me just say this. What I worry here is that the guillotine, for example, and I'll move on to this item after this, has this sort of eat the rich feeling. And I know some people obviously use that as just a phrase like, hey, like we need to do something about wealth inequality and something about the billionaires.
Sure.
But there are people who like take that shit seriously, where like, we seriously need to redistribute their wealth. Billionaires are inherently immoral. And this is something that has to be fixed. And I just have a lot of questions about how you solve some of these issues, or like where you draw your lines, like how much, should billionaires be, obviously should there be billionaires?
So then we'll probably do another like bonus episode or something. And you and I, or maybe a bullshit boulevard down the road, we'll get some chunk to talk about this.
Sure.
Because I was just impressed. You let me rant for that whole time and you're like, moving on. I'm like, wow, didn't even say it. Yeah. But I know we're cautious of time.
On our NBS News episode,
we'll move on, but
be cautious of time, as you're saying. So
that's true. I know. And I'm going on my own personal rants here when we're trying to cover news. So I get it. Like I figured reining me in there, but yeah, we'll talk about this at another time, but it is.
And so, for the next item, I'm going to bring this sort of a little bit close to home. Unfortunately, we still have to talk about things that are going on in Portland. So these next two things are very closely related. So Governor Brown releases this unified law enforcement plan. So this was coming from Coin News on the 30th of August. This is a few days ago. And Kate Brown, the governor, she released this unified law enforcement plan in response to a deadly shooting on that Saturday night in downtown Portland. So the governor said that the plan, and I'll be covering that in a moment, by the way. And so the governor said in the plan that is meant to protect free speech and bring an end to violence in downtown Portland. So she said the Portland Police Bureau's resources have been stretched thin, and the plan will help to alleviate some of that. And some of the details that are in this plan, I wanted to just go over for a moment. She said that the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office will prosecute serious criminal offenses, including arson and physical violence. The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office will work with system partners to hold individuals booked for violent behavior and to ensure that there is adequate jail space to hold such individuals. As done previously, the Oregon State Police would detail personnel and resources to Portland to free up the Portland Police Bureau's investigative capabilities to arrest and charge those engaging in violent acts. And then the OSP troopers will continue their standard service practice of wearing body cameras to allow for documentation of their activities. And the last three things here, she says that the governor is asking Clackamas and Washington County Sheriff's offices and the City of Gresham Police Department, which are all right near Portland in case nobody's familiar with the area, and in order to support the Portland Police Bureau with personnel resources to keep the peace and protect free speech. And then the Oregon State Police has offered over 24 body cameras to help with the Portland Police Bureau. And then the mayor will seek financial resources to reimburse these jurisdictions for all of their support. And then finally, the United States Attorney and the FBI will commit additional resources for investigation of criminal activity. So the big thing here, why this is so important, is because on this night, that Saturday night that I was just mentioning where someone was shot and killed, this is coming actually straight from Coin News, is that they witnessed two young men yelling and having an altercation near Southwest 3rd and Alder around 8:45 p.m. Someone sprayed mace and then someone pulled out a gun. Coin 6 News heard shots fired and a wounded man was seen on the ground and the suspect took off running according to witnesses. And then police confirmed the death on 9 p.m., that the victim was shot in the chest and had died. And then it looks like the victim was part of the Patriot Prayer group, and which is known as a right-wing group whose members have frequently clashed with protesters in Portland. And then the 2 hours following the shooting, protesters gathered downtown and there was sporadic fighting and vandalism, police said, and some gave speeches in Lodenstown Square Park before the protest petered out. So the big thing here, now I've seen the video. I watched it earlier today. So Portland, as we've talked about previously on the podcast, there have been over 100 days of continual protests since the killing of George Floyd. And obviously it's a very sensitive issue for the Black Lives Matter movement. And they're continually having butting head confrontations with right-wing groups, especially Patriot Prayer and Proud Boys, and apparently these bungalow boys who I don't know anything of, but I've been hearing these names going around.
But I have seen the videos of them driving through town with their flags and like spraying spray paint or like hitting people with stuff. Like, I don't know.
So
there has been an escalation in that kind of, clash as of recently. It hasn't been happening for the whole 100 days, but Portland has a history of clashing with different.
Yeah, definitely. And so the specific incident was like these, there was a few days around here where this huge caravan of trucks in Trump supporters with flags and everything drove through downtown, spraying people with bear mace and, basically like rolling, come on, getting them on, right? Like, hey, let's have a fight. Basically, that's sort of what it seemed like, big mass troll caravan, as far as I'm concerned, which is actually funny because, the trucks in the videos that had been seen of it, like I see them driving around all the time. So it's interesting to me just how familiar that sort of sight is, especially in the place where I live. But again, in this specific incident, there was this member of Patriot Prayer, and I don't have his name on me at the moment, so I'll have to look it up later. But he is downtown Portland. They had been sort of harassing protesters, nothing exceptionally violent up until this point. But then this other man, let's see, what is his name? I'm pulling it up right now. Michael Forrest Reinhall. He found this man, Aaron J. Danielson, if that's his name, who was shot and killed, found him, called him out as a Trump supporter, and shot him, and then ran away. And then in the preceding days after the fact, he finds this freelance journalist to send in to have this featured news, not a news conference, but a news interview for Vice News Tonight. And which these all will be in the show notes in this video. Specifically, his interview will be in the show notes. So he goes on, he has this interview with a freelance journalist, and it goes on Vice News Tonight. They interview him about his actions and why he did what he did, and just his perception of it. They showed the video of him killing the man, saw him dead. That was like, okay, great, another dead person I have to see. And then a few
Yeah, it's all about you, Ian. You're totally right.
it is
100%
it's all about
you.
me on this podcast.
Oh, poor you.
So
poor you.
His friends, they don't, I'm sure they've seen plenty of dead people. Anyway, so a few hours after this interview, this exclusive interview was uploaded onto Vice News's YouTube account. Not Vancouver police, but I think Washington State troopers and the Portland Police Bureau found Michael Reinhall and had an altercation with him at his place of residence or wherever he was staying, and shot and killed him. They shot him multiple times, and he was killed. And so the big thing here that I really want to focus this, this short little discussion on around this news point is that, as we've talking about before, with the Jeff Bezos thing seeming like normal, the reason why I said that is because what's going on in Portland and other places across the country, obviously Kenosha, Wisconsin, and Seattle, Washington, are having their own little bursts of kind of craziness. But Portland, to me, seems like the epicenter of where all this is going down. And I really want your take on this. This is the main reason why I said that to you in the text earlier, because I see this sort of thing, and I'm like, and it's funny, this Michael Reinhall in this video interview, he said when these caravan were driving through, he felt like this was the start of a war. And sure. I can't help but actually feel similar, because I see what's going on, because for a long time, right-wing protesters and left-wing protesters have been clashing. For the most part, it's the right-wingers that have guns. It's the ones who are sort of, they're sort of anting on, the left, right, in order to get a response, because they obviously don't take Black Lives Matter seriously. And they sort of are being trolls in that matter, with the guise of patriotism and nationalism. But at this point, it actually feels like we're getting to an inflection point where both sides are taking this extremely seriously. The right obviously views like Black Lives Matter and everything that they represent as an affront to American democracy. And Black Lives Matter and Antifa see fascism and police brutality and racism in such a systematic and systemic way that they need to act about it. They feel it deep in their hearts that they need to act out and push back against whatever evil that they're seeing. And I think that, like I said, and I'll turn this over to you in just a moment, we are at this inflection point where shit's going to start to get nasty. And I'm especially in the shadow of an election coming up, I'm worried that, one, this will make the election even worse. At least as far as the outcome goes. I'm worried about 4 more years of Trump. And I also just think that we're going to see increasingly more violent riots. We're going to see more deaths. And it's just, I feel like it's a breakdown in our actual society, even though it's on a small scale. So I'll throw it over to you, because I know I just talked a lot, and I really want your reaction to what's going on. Obviously we can talk about this in a later episode, but please.
I mean, you gave me the courtesy of ranting a little bit ago, so the least I can do is pass along the favor here. This is interesting, and I know that you and I think differently. And when it comes to this kind of topic, I definitely do have my own lens, that the way that I view, what is happening here. And let me put my phone on silent. Good Lord, see, that's what happens when we need our phones for notes. Nobody reached out to me. So, but the thing is that I feel that the exacerbation of what's going on in Portland is not, I don't know, I have a lot of liberal friends that live out there, and a lot of them, I have one friend who has participated in, I think, 70 nights of the protest out of the 100.
That's a lot.
And yeah. And speaking with him, he basically described it to me as that, a lot of the right media portrays Portland as this crazy battleground where he's beating stuff up. But he says, in actuality, most of Portland is calm. Most of Portland lives their lives. It's like legitimately a 3 to 4 block radius, maybe. And the nighttime that has this. A lot of the times they're judging this. A lot of the times it's peaceful until police show up, is what's been described to me. And then once there's a presence there, there's kind of a thing. So again, like you said, even the whatever, when you have these trucks coming in, it's the presence, the tension that builds. And for me, this is where we talked about where I said I want to have a further conversation where context goes to die. Because again, like the save the cat moment, where this is kind of anecdotal, but we're going to go here. So like in the movie Aladdin, when Aladdin steals,
the original animated
hear me out,
one, right? Not the Disney, not the
the original animated one. When he steals the bread, okay, that he's technically stealing. That's theft, right? That is something that like you frown upon. But then you see the scene where he breaks the bread, and instead of eating it, he gives it to the starving children. And Robin Hood.
Well, hold on just a second, Josh. Let me make a small correction to your Aladdin scene, if I'm remembering this correctly. He steals the bread for himself and Abu, his monkey, and then when he finds the 2 children starving, he's like, "Oh shit, I should give them to him." I don't think he sought children out to give them the bread. Let's just be clear here.
No, you're right. But at the same time, though, when he sees that, okay,
he has an empathetic response.
He wants to give. Exactly, which kind of like, which makes him the good guy. So he did something bad, but here's the context where we see him, and it makes him the good guy, in that moment. And the thing that I bring that up is because, how many times, even in our lifetime, have we seen, protests that turn violent in other countries where they're protesting like things that are going wrong, whether they be dictatorships or things that we can sit here in America and go, good for them. Like they're fighting like for what they believe in. They're fighting for the democracy, or they're fighting for whatever. And for us, I just go like, in a lot of context, I would never justify violence. But there are specific contexts of how change is made. And when so much time has passed, like when you want something and you want it to happen and you want to like bring light to it, like I am sympathetic to the idea of like, of wanting to have your voice be heard and needing an outlet to achieve that when every other facet has been tried and nothing has worked. Like the 1960s proved alone with the civil rights movement that like peaceful protesting and things like that, like there are things that I can understand, that like maybe understanding why they're doing what they're doing as opposed to just labeling them as terrorists or extremists or things like that. We're not digging deeper into trying to understand the concept or the context of the purpose of either the looting or the property destruction. Instead, it's conflated to like these people are evil, to the point where we have people in trucks on the opposition driving in and starting like this kind of like tension. And the thing that really interests me as well is that, it's the double standard of like, theoretically, if there was a fight that happened and you're talking about self-defense, if you're talking about the Second Right or the Second Amendment, which which a lot of the people, a lot of conservative Republicans love, it's like, who knows? Maybe you can make the argument that person was exercising their Second Amendment right. They felt threatened. They had a gun. They made a shot. There it is. And when it's like Kyle Rittenhouse or whatever and the Kenosha police, it's just like there's certain things where like he is, oh no, that person was bad or this. He's like glorified in the wrong way. And then, like, this
conservative news media is absolutely hero worshiping this kid. Yeah.
Right. And so what I'm saying is that it's a matter of perspective and context. And I feel like we're choosing to not understand the context of either side. We're choosing to assume that we know it. And it's all based on emotion. Both sides are going hard on emotion. And it's just, first of all, and like you said, it's coincidental that Vice thing came out and 3 days later he was murdered by the police.
They uploaded it, and then within hours he was killed by the police. Within hours of it being,
son of a bitch. Okay, so within hours he was killed by the police. And so here's the thing. This is my thing. Police should be fucking killing people. I'm sorry, but their job is not to kill people. You know how many people they've arrested?
Well, I mean, I don't know the full details of it, but apparently, fair enough.
I'm talking about overall though, just in general. In general, the police's job is to not murder people. That should be the last. That should be the last resort. Absolutely the last resort. You don't just fire off a round and take a life. You know what I mean? Because and the last thing I'll say about this that really blows my mind is I don't understand how a side that loves spending money on the military and glorifies violence to achieve. How many times has America gone to war to fight for what we believe is right? So it's confusing to me that in the context of a military, which is funded by our tax dollars, that's hero. No, if you go and kill people, if you go and invade somebody else or try to get your message across, and you do violent acts to get, because what does America do? We're the police of the world.
Police, yeah.
America is interjecting ourselves, in military wise all over the place. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not discrediting that there are real threats and that there is reasons to have certain military presences because I understand that. But there are but there's a lot of stuff that we have done that I'm like, why are we doing this? And so it doesn't make sense that people that glorify the military and glorify the violence that's within the military cannot understand, in a domestic sense, why violence would be used to get the point across, because that's the entire concept of war.
For sure. And I do think, I don't think you're wrong at all. And I think what's interesting too with Portland specifically, with these far right caravan that came through, I don't even know if they're all far right, right? They're just people who see the shit that's on the news, right? And they're like, they want to react to it. And with that, I mean, it sort of seems like it is becoming this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Whatever is actually going on in Portland, the media has a specific spin on it. Whether it be more left-wing media or right-wing media, they're having their own spin on what's actually going on. And the right-wing media, conservative media on, Fox News, obviously specifically, is that it is chaos and anarchy, and these Black Lives Matter protesters are violent anti-fascists, and they are here to ruin democracy and to ruin liberalism. And there is something needs to be done about it because the police isn't doing it, the government isn't doing anything about it. And so what do conservatives in rural America who have a deep-seated fear of change want to do about it? They see this, they're like, the police aren't doing anything about it. The government, we got to do something. We're going in here. We're going to fucking stop these people. And so then you get more violence because, just as you were saying before, the mere presence of these people is threatening to others. This Michael Rainhall guy who was shot and killed after, of course, killing the guy in the Proud Boys. He said in his interview, by merely seeing the trucks, he felt his life was threatened. Now, whether or not his life was actually, in jeopardy, like it's anybody's game. It very well could have been, but just the fact that you see that in your town and you have a fear response, that's very real. And the fact that these people, who are driving in these trucks, they're like, no, we're going to stop these anarchists, for destroying our great fucking democracy. I'm sure.
And again, but that's also, Ian, I don't mean to interrupt, but just a small thing, but that's also the idea of building this persona of what we think, because I'm sympathetic to that, because if you think Trump supporter, what do you think? What are you going to connect to that if you're a liberal? You're going to think like gun carrying, like I'm going to shoot you. Like if you you're going to connect all those things that you're seeing, and you're going to feel a sense of threat with that. And so that's why I'm just saying, where it's just like, I just don't understand, like, how do you, if you're a believer in the Second Amendment and like protecting yourself. And if you can, like I said, with that, Kyle Rittenhouse guy, whatever his name is, if you can do that, like, how can you not? This is why I think it breaks down to nobody cares. Like, context doesn't matter. Like, what you believe doesn't matter. It's this validation of my tribe. This tribalism, it's extreme tribalism. And it's this breakdown of like, if I can be validated from my tribe and validated from the people that think the same as me, that means so much more than understanding somebody else's perspective, than understanding what could possibly be going on in my own perspective. And we are like driven into this us and them thinking. And I don't know, maybe maybe this started because of like the rampant increase of the left versus right, or the blue versus red, or all of these things that we have now that have been stuck together. It's just creating this hodgepodge, this level of chaos, where hopefully, what we're trying to do here with a podcast of just trying to discuss and maybe see what's going on. And, for us, we're integrating our own personal discussion and news,
Right. I mean, you're not wrong.
there's got to be. I'm trying to be optimistic here because
Somebody's got to
I
be.
find myself even as an optimist. Yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult because like for me, at first I joked when you said nihilist in chief, and then now I'm just like, the world's kind of shifting to I mean, at least from my experience, what I feel like, it kind of seems like we're kind of getting more nihilistic every.
Yeah, I'm glad you're starting to see it my way. It's just I
I knew that you're going to take. That's all you're going to take out of. That's all you're going to take out of that. I freaking knew it.
Yeah, it's just I worry about the same thing. To say it plainly. But tell you what, let's talk about one more story and then we'll get out of here for our audience.
Sure,
so we don't completely
sounds like a plan.
So the last thing here, this is coming from the Washington Post on the 4th of September. So that was yesterday. The Postal Service blocked Florida Postal Service police. Remember, the Postal Service has an enforcement wing to their agency.
Yep, we covered that. We covered that. On
right. So they blocked a Florida congresswoman from touring several USPS plants. So Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who's a Democrat from Florida, says she notified the mail service of her plans, but the agency says she did not give enough notice. The U.S. Postal Service police officers barred Florida Congresswoman Schultz from scheduled tours at 2 mail processing complexes on Friday, blocking entry to the facilities and threatening to escort her from the property if she refused to leave. Schultz had arrived at the Royal Palm Processing and Distribution Center in Opelika, Florida, for a 4 a.m. tour to find the parking lot entry roped off with caution tape and a U.S. Postal Inspection Service cruiser blocking the gate. Local Postal Service officials informed her and union leaders waiting to accompany her into the building that national USPS leadership had directed them to bar the group from the building. Similarly, at 6:30 a.m., she was denied access into them at the Miami Processing and Distribution Center. And, there were Postal Inspection Service officers that stood in front of the turnstiles into the lobby. There's like a big picture of it that I saw of this. And so now, basically the reason why she was going to be touring these facilities is that lawmakers in the House and the Senate have been visiting USPS facilities in recent weeks, and they're trying to exert some type of oversight responsibility for the over the agency after like various things like postal workers and internal post office performance data reported growing delays, and then obviously the mail-in ballot for the election having to be a big.
Yeah, we covered some of this too. We covered some of the in our last episode. Like we covered some of what's going on there, which is why I was going to make a QAnon joke in our QAnon episode because Debbie Wasserman Schultz was there's a again a QAnon conspiracy around her, so I'm like maybe they didn't let her in because they're like I know what you're up to,
right?
But in prior stuff we covered that. But so that's
it just it is really interesting to me because it definitely shows that. Personally, I believe there's got to be something fishy going on with the Postal Service. Not the fact that like they send hundreds of advertisements in the mail every day.
Really, Mister the right of privacy, like Mr. Like you can't go attack privacy now all of a sudden because somebody's not letting somebody in to see something.
Well, to be fair, they're not a private.
They're
not a private agency, are they? They're a very public agency. And the thing is like,
all right,
there is obviously these problems going on with the Postmaster General. What was his name? Louis DeJoy, and him being a vocal Trump supporter. I think that. Again, we're going to start to see this sort of bending on how democracy will play out in the election and how the mail-in ballot system, because there's going to be a lot of mail-in ballots, regardless of whether or not like it's actually accepted in your state. There's going to be a lot of mail-in ballots in states that do have it, and then a lot of absentee ballots in places that otherwise have in-person voting.
Well, which is why this is such a big issue. You know what I mean? If it wasn't for the pandemic, and if it wasn't for this idea of the fact that the increase in mail-in voting, as we talked about prior, but the thing that's interesting is that it appears that this idea of manipulation and persuasion, the twist of the viewpoint or the lens of which we view these things in, like this is just another example of like, we are so cluttered with information and news, whether that be from social media or whatever, that like even this, everything has a spin now, and like maybe it always has, but I feel like even more so, the spins are so aggressive on either side that like, it's just like, I don't know, for me, it feels like just blatant open manipulation on all sides.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely don't think you're wrong. I'm just seeing that, like, okay, with the postal service issue and, the mail-in ballots, or the post office, the boxes where you drop in your mail, whatever you want to call those, with those being removed from, like,
You mean
yes,
mailboxes?
no, not mailboxes, like, not the ones outside of your, fuck you, not the ones outside of your house, but the ones that you go in and drop in. They're big and blue. Everybody fucking knows what they look like. I don't need to explain it. um like the fact that there was this spin on it from the left, right, that, like, obviously, the Trump administration and the post office, they're in bed with the Trump administration. So they're trying to block, the election basically from taking place in a reasonable way. And, it's going to, stop minorities from being able to vote successfully. They're like, there's this big political spin on it. Similarly, I think with Portland, what we were just talking about, there is this sort of cynicism that is a take on everything, like the fact that, like, there's always wrongdoing. I mean, I just was sort of guilty of it myself. I mean, this seems fishy to me. Like why, like, it's clear, like, a congresswoman wouldn't just show up at a place like, hey, like, let me in, and they're like, well, you didn't schedule an appointment. It's like, of course, I'm sure she did. The other thing is too, like, why does the postal service need an enforcement wing to their agency? Why do they need police? That, I mean,
Well, they've had one for a long time. Well, and okay, so that, looking into that actually has to do with mainly with mail fraud. Their main purpose is to regulate mail fraud. But the thing is too, though, like, the only little quip I want to say off of what you just said is that I just feel that we're having a distortion of I think all of our own cognitive biases of what we want to be true is kind of distorting the lines between, like, causation and correlation.
yeah,
And possibly certain things that are connected to where, if there's certain things that might, and again, because both truths can exist, where it's like, if the causation is the Postal Service losing money, and they start pulling boxes because it's like a business model. Because theoretically, this guy, yes, he is he's donated to the Trump campaign and he is a vocal Trump supporter, but he still is a businessman that was put into this role. And so, as a businessman might do, if I'm being sympathetic here, you're going to try to cut costs and save money because they're not making money. But the causation of not making money and the correlation of it being an election year, and the coronavirus making more people going to vote by mail. Like, maybe the correlation is not quite causation, maybe the causation is not quite correlation, but because we're so in our own, like, opinion of what we believe is true, if our bias feels that that's the right pathway, it's going to feel really good to want to believe that. And it's going to seem strong that the correlation might be the causation. And who knows, maybe it is. But I think we just got to take a step back just to really see if that's what's going on. Because even in my mind, I feel that sometimes I'll riff on this podcast and I go, man, am I saying this because I feel like I want it to be right? Or am I saying it because I think it is?
You know what, Josh? I actually have advice for that. Just always assume that you're right.
Now
always assume that you're right.
Shut your mouth.
I do it all the time. It's great. I sleep like a baby. So, yeah. It definitely feels like, getting back on track here, it definitely feels like personally, from my perspective, I feel like we're getting to an apex, right, where there's everything that could possibly go wrong feels like it's going wrong. This mishap with the Postal Service, possibility of another 4 years of Trump, a pandemic, seemingly unregulated police brutality, in many cities across the country, even though that's not new. Like, it's definitely feels like it's ramping up to a point like, okay, what the fuck is going on? Whatever side that you're on. Even with the election, the 2016 election with the Russia investigation, obviously that is still having ramifications up until today.
Like, the fact that nobody ever read the Mueller report, I'm like, how do you not? It's like, even the Republican-led, specialist was like, yeah, so it turns out it actually was Russia. I know we covered this before, but I'm just like, well, it's like, if, and we learn these things, like, well, yeah, if people would have actually read their Mueller report and understand what happened there, Yeah, I know
It's like
it's a huge
400 pages.
document,
Yeah.
but like really looked into what's going on. Right, but it's you're right. It's just like half of it's like we're just not even we're I get okay. So I know that we brought this up and we try to figure it out. It's from Dark, and I'm going to say it again, as where it's like I feel like the best. Even this is not even equivalent because this is what's Dark. What is that?
German. It's Germany.
what
Yeah.
country is that?
The show on
German.
Netflix,
Okay,
yeah.
so even this yeah, the show on Netflix. Sorry, I have to clarify. But even in the German show, like I feel like it applies this metaphor or this simile or whatever this saying applies more to what's going on in America than it does anything ever. Where it's like we see a drop and we feel like we understand the drop, so therefore we understand the ocean.
Yeah,
And
podcast.
Well,
in the podcast right there, mic drop.
Mic
baby.
drop.
Yeah.
If my mic wasn't mounted right
just,
here,
you know what? Just hit it, like really, just like yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right, Josh. Context and perspective are vastly important.
Hold on, can you say that one more? Can you just repeat that one more
right,
time?
Josh? I think you're right. No, the context and perspective are
that never happens.
Sure it does. Context and perspective are vastly important in times like these. And it is important to realize that we only can view things from such a small vantage point. And, Josh and I know you and I pontificate quite a bit. I probably am more guilty of it a little bit than you are. But I mean, we only can know so much. We can only learn so much. We try to learn more every day, every time we do the podcast. We try to have new interesting topics. And the thing is like, in our current political landscape, out of anything else, I feel like there is a breakdown in communication and understanding, and people just aren't taking the time. Whatever it is, whether it's to listen, whether it's to express their views in an articulate way, people just aren't taking the time because politics is so reactionary. And I know, I'm sure a political, a political science major could come and tell me, he's like, well, politics has been like this for the past 50 to 70 years. And I'm like, okay, well, fuck you. Like, this is now. Like we have to react.
Well, sure. And I have a friend too. Like, I have a friend who is very conservative leaning, and sometimes we'll have conversations and we'll kind of go down this route. But they were telling me that a friend of theirs posted something about the NBA and like the fact that they're making this grandiose stand, and then somebody else had posted that like they should be paid more money because they're choosing to not play, like to stand up for what they believe in. And my friend had just basically asked a question: why do you think that they should be paid more because of that? And this person was called ugly. just
an instant name call. Yeah.
Yes. And, and she was like frustrated. She was just like, I just don't understand. Like, I wasn't trying to be facetious. I was just asking a question, and then like, I just get hit with that. And that's what I mean by this idea of this like, ethics of things. So I now try to practice. I just want to replace judgment with curiosity. And then once I kind of feel like I have a grasp on something, then I might make a call or like an opinion based on what I feel. But, as somebody who had been called a moron once before for trying to
ask questions,
learn something more, ask questions. So I think that's kind of hitting the nail on the head there, where we just don't care. We don't care about, on, and all facets on many topics of what the other person might be trying to mean.
I follow this this great like philosophy meme page on Instagram. Just shows you what I do with my time. And there's, are you familiar with Top Gear, like the British Top Gear, where it's the three guys and they all drive around, they talk about cars, and you don't know the show. Okay. Hopefully some of our,
I mean, I've heard of it, but like, I'll be honest, I've never been a car
That's
geek,
true.
So I don't know.
Some of our listeners should know what this show is. And there's this one meme where they're looking at these two different cars and comparing them. And one of them, not James May, but God, I can't remember his name now. It's been so long since I watched it, but the tall motherfucker, him and
can't believe.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
tip of my tongue,
right there.
It's on the tip of my tongue.
That tall dude. But one of them, he's like, "Hey, like, what do you think of this car? Do you like it?" And the tall one, I'm really pissed that I can't remember his name. He's like, "Oh, that car is great. but have you seen this one? And the philosophy meme is like the guy who's saying like, hey, have you seen this car? And it's got answers on it. Like, oh, answers. Oh, those are great. But have you seen this one? And it's just questions. Like it's
Yeah.
stupid philosophy, major shit. But it's like that's sort of the thing that we get off on. And I, not just philosophers, but I know you and I, like, we want to sit here and ask the questions, like, to try and make sense of the world. It's not
Sure.
necessarily that they're always going to be an answer. So I know we're sort of
one more funny meme
here, but yeah.
I know we're riffing, but one more funny meme as we go, because I know we're having fun. So it was just talking about, in a similar vein, it just talked about, like, right now, what I feel like what happened is the left is saying 2 + 2 is 4, and then the right's going, yeah, well, 2 + 3 is 5, and then the left is going, but that's not the equation that we're talking about. And the right's going, where'd you hear that? CNN? Like,
it's great.
I thought that was just kind of a funny what's going on. But yeah, with that being said, thank you for bearing with our rants and our anecdotal bullshit as we kind of splice in news with that and have some fun with our first ever like video. Welcome. I mean, we're in my bedroom. Look at that. See the Superman photo on the back? Like, there we go.
I'm in an office.
I forgot how to share.
That's what I do every day. Josh is just sitting there jerking off to Superman.
What? My books are down right over there.
Anyway, folks.
But all right,
thanks
so much for tuning in. We'll see you.
Bye-bye.
Deuces.